Okay, so let's start the study in stream. I'm going to study the concept of consciousness. This is the 6th day, and I'm going to read the paragraph dedicated to panpsychism. Last time I got through the 7th chapter, Theories of Consciousness, and started reading the 8th chapter, Metaphysical Theories of Consciousness. And I've read dualist theories, like dualist theories, of substance dualism, property dualism, fundamental property dualism, emergent property dualism, neutral monist property dualism. And I stopped at panpsychism. So in today, I'm going to read panpsychism and talk about it. So a few notes before I start reading. I've noticed that I have some problems with my speed. I read so fast and I speak too fast. So I'd like to slow down to learn to make pauses. I also want to focus on separating sentences. So I want to be aware of my speech. And at every moment when I come to the end of the sentence, I have to make a pause. So I want to learn to speak distinctively, that whenever somebody else is watching, it's going to be easier for them to understand what I'm saying. Even though I was thinking more about the quality of these studying streams in terms of improving the emotional atmosphere, whatever. So I wanted to, yeah, it's artificial. I mean, I'm trying to speak, I'm trying to develop my ideas. And I see that most of the time when I try to focus on grammar, it gets so artificial, especially when I try to make pauses and when I try to set out some goals. I can't even find out the proper way of saying what I want to say. But when I don't care about grammar and pronunciation, there's a kind of natural flow, and it doesn't bother me at all if I make a mistake or if I don't make a pause. But I understand that I have to, I want to sound more distinctive. I want to be precise. And to do that, there is certain training. I'm recording these videos for myself, but at the same time, I want to use them to improve the quality of my speech. It's not just only about English, learning how to speak English or pronunciation. It's about speech in general. So I want to make my speech sound strong. And I want to make some videos, of course, to like use my speech for making videos and for studying streams. And for that, as I said, yeah, there are some tasks. So one task is to focus my attention and be conscious of my speech all the time. To be conscious of sentences. So when I say a sentence, I have to make a pause. And then I want to concentrate on grammar and use perfect grammar. So I want to improve my grammar and just paying attention to all these elements, like the distinctiveness, the grammar, voice, silent pauses between sentences. All this is going to help to improve the quality of my studying streams. One more thing, I want to make these studying streams really interesting and engaging so that it's not going to be interesting only for me, but if you want to study English or philosophy, and if you find this stream, it probably may also be interesting for you as well. But I understand, like, I have to do some sort of work. I don't want to make you watch all my streams. It's not the purpose. So the purpose, I said it many times before, that if you find this stream and if you are working on English, the best thing you can do is not watching what I'm doing, just doing the same thing, just recording, studying streams, sitting on the computer, setting a task to develop your language, find some materials and read them aloud, practicing like this kind of exercise. So verbalizing your stream of consciousness while reading certain articles. But at the same time, I want to attract some attention. I mean, I want to get some feedback. And since there was no feedback for many years on my YouTube channel, yeah, I guess it's mostly because I didn't want it. So I didn't really I didn't really think about feedback, since I prefer to work on my own. Yeah, and now I can see it. Maybe it's a stupid idea. I mean, why the hell do I need feedback? Why the hell do I need somebody telling me what's wrong and what's right? So I may just continue developing my studying stream with an idea that probably, I just want to sound better. No, I want to improve my speech. So there are so many different tasks. But okay, let's focus just on three of them. So silent pauses between sentences for what? Doesn't matter, just improving the quality of my speech. Grammar, attention to grammar. So whenever I speak, I have to be aware that I make mistakes. So if I make a mistake, I have to make a pause and think about it. Like, why did I say that? If I wasn't, if I didn't intend to say that, what made me say that? Mistakes, grammar, and pronunciation. Once again, clarity of pronunciation. So with that being said, let's go on. Panpsychism. Panpsychism might be regarded as a fourth type of property dualism, in that it regards all the constituents of reality as having some psychic, as having some psychic or at least proto-psychic properties, distinct from whatever physical properties they may have. Okay. So I'm going to read a paragraph and then deconstruct each sentence. Indeed, neutral monism might be consistently combined with some version of pan-proto-psychism, according to which the proto-mental aspects of micro-constituents can give rise under suitable conditions of combination to full-blown consciousness. All right. Panpsychism might be regarded as a fourth type of property, dualism. Panpsychism might be regarded as a fourth type of property dualism, in that it regards all the constituents of reality as having some psychic or at least proto-psychic properties, distinct from whatever physical properties they may have. A fourth type of property dualism. Yeah, previous three types were like neutral monist property dualism, emergent property dualism, fundamental property dualism, and panpsychism for the fourth type of property dualism. It regards all the constituents of reality as having some psychic or at least proto-psychic properties, distinct from whatever physical properties they may have. So reality, like each particle in reality, is connected to other particles and have certain psychic or proto-psychic properties. So it makes a lot of sense. Like we may identify consciousness as a uniquely human experience, well, at least some definition of consciousness fit to this category. So we may say that only humans have consciousness and all other species don't have it. But in the same way, we may say that consciousness is everywhere and everything is consciousness. And panpsychism basically tells that everything is consciousness, and what we experience as humans is just a part of this conscious experience. So if I were a microphone, I'll probably have a proto psychic element in myself. So since everything is moving, and in reality, like there's no states which are permanent. So everything is just changing all the time. And on a micro level, like on a subatomic level, there's constant movement and constant change. And we may say that this change in itself is charged with some psychic elements, or it may be not even in a physical domain. I mean, we may say that consciousness is something which is outside of the physical world, and everything has it, or everything is in it, since you can't have anything without consciousness. I mean, if you get rid of consciousness, you get rid of the entire world. Since if nobody perceives it, it doesn't exist. To exist, you have to have somebody who may uh, point out at you and say that this object exists, or you have to have consciousness. So you may be aware of your existence, but to be aware again, you have to have consciousness. And without consciousness, without awareness, and without anybody who is conscious and may say like this thing exists, there's no there's no anything basically. Since when we say, okay, if we remove all like people and living forms from Earth, would Earth still exist? Like depends how you identify existence itself. So will sun exist if there's no Earth? Well, if there's somebody who can perceive sun, it will exist. But if there's nobody who can perceive sun, there's like the word exist makes very little sense. And if there's no language which can describe the existence of sun, it also makes very little sense. But anyway, properties. So I'm trying to understand. Yeah, I'm not trying to interpret it. I have to be more careful in interpreting things, since I already said so many stupid things which made me feel shameful. And I understand that, when I just try to read the article, my personal view is maybe it's not just different. I certainly have certain perception and certain experience related to the word consciousness. So whenever I hear it or whenever I talk about it, I'm trying to conceptualize my personal experience and I'm trying to compare my personal experience with the theories which are described by modern scientists. And I see that quite often by personal experience, I don't mean something that I have seen or something that I did. I also mean like books which I've read, and in these books I had some understanding. Like I had some, I read some philosophers. They discussed consciousness, and something was like some ideas were imprinted on my mind, and now I don't remember. Like I have a very distinctive approach to studying. I'm not memorizing anything. Whenever I study, for example, philosophy or psychology or any science, physics, linguistics, I'm not trying to study concepts and remember definitions and remember, all these bodies of knowledge. No, for me, it's more just getting through it and trying to put it in my own like words. So if I read an article about consciousness, I don't try to remember everything. Probably I'll find some sentences which I may remember, but my approach is more about just understanding. It's like when you watch a video, and after watching a video, you may say that you understood what was going on there in the video, what the speaker was talking about, but you can't really tell what he was talking about. Okay, a phone. So the second time when I record the podcast, there's phone. Okay, I have to make a short pause. Да, да. Вы имеете в виду лекции английский с нуля? Speaking class. ВКЦ, который? Инновационный культурный центр? В воскресенье. Ну, приходите, да, можно писать. Я объясню на мероприятии. Пожалуйста. Okay, let's go on. So I was talking about my approach to studying. As I said, I don't memorize anything. I'm not trying to remember all different concepts. I'm trying to understand, and understanding is quite different from memorizing, though sometimes it requires memorizing. But most of the time it requires just being like paying attention to what's going on and trying to like see the connection between what is described and what is like real experience. So if you may find like when you read this sentence on panpsychism, the best way to understand it is find something in your experience related to this sentence and wrap your head around this experience. Just talk about this experience. If you then forget it, it doesn't matter. What's really matter is that you are able to understand what you read at this moment. And again, it's like my personal way of studying things, and I don't think it's going to be suitable for everybody. But anyway, once again, panpsychism might be regarded as a fourth type of property dualism. In that it regards all the constituents of reality. Not sure that I say it correctly. Constituents. Constituent. Constituent, not constituents, constituents. Constituents of reality as having some psychic or at least proto-psychic properties, distinct from whatever physical properties they may have. So reality may have, it has both psychic and physical properties. But for panpsychism, so everything the reality is made of has psychic element. Well, now, yeah, let's try to criticize it a little bit, like criticize my own view on panpsychism. Yeah, I stated that I like this way of looking at reality. So for me, I wouldn't say it's 100% true, but for me, it's kind of good explanation. So everything has, like, it's not a good explanation, but you can't really disprove it, since all you have is just your brain, and all you know is what your brain tells you about the reality. So if something else has a brain, like a bat or a cat, you can't know what's going on in cat's reality. And well, you may say that consciousness is produced by brain, but it's very suspicious as well, since you know it only because your brain tells you that consciousness is produced by brain, that you have a brain, you have a consciousness, and somebody like you may have a consciousness, like an animal may probably have some kind of consciousness, maybe even smart, but trees, for example, or flowers, they don't have consciousness. But it's hard to tell, since they're also they're alive. And it all depends how you interpret life, since you may say that life is, everything is life. So I may take a part of this flower, eat it, and it becomes alive. And I may take a part of everything, just divide it in smallest parts and just put it in my body and assimilate it, and it becomes me. And that's what flowers do. So they get some minerals from soil, from ground, and then they transform them in leaves, and then animals eat these leaves, and we eat animals, and we have consciousness. But who, like, it's very complicated. Panpsychism, like for me, it's more, but probably it's just a belief. So I wouldn't say that if, for example, somebody is going to attack panpsychism, I'm not the one who is going to defend it and say, no, panpsychism, it's a dogma, and you have to believe in panpsychism. There's no way to disprove panpsychism or whatever. But I just like this view. I mean, I also like view, uh, another view, which says that there's only physical world. There's everything is physical. I mean, panpsychism claims that there's something like psyche, saying that it's a form of dualism. There's two different elements, right? So one of them is physical world, and another is psychic world. And panpsychism basically says that everything which is physical also has psyche. So it's also psychological, but it makes very little sense from that point. But anyway, so I like this idea that physical and psychic, it's one and the same thing, and just different names. So when we look at the world, when we say the world is made of matter, or the world is made of small particles, or when we say the world is made of conscious elements, like monads, let's say. And both statements, they uh, tell, they express the same idea, but they use different words. And each of these words have certain theories, and each of these words represent different approaches. So it's like two different languages, basically. I'm going to use a Russian language, start speaking in Russian, and explain everything in Russian. And in that case, it wouldn't make any sense for somebody who doesn't speak Russian. So if you're listening to me now, and if you know only English, I shift to Russian, you know no Russian, for you it makes no sense. In the same way, like these approaches, these philosophies like panpsychism or physicalism or materialism or spiritualism or idealism or realism, they basically talk about one and the same thing, but they use different languages. And if you don't understand one language, you won't be able to understand what's really good. You maybe even say that it's all wrong. It's a wrong theory. It doesn't make any sense. What are you guys talking about? It's stupid. But you just don't know the language. That's the idea. So panpsychism, for example, is just one language which attempts to describe reality. And physicalism or materialism, it's another language, and it has a good job describing reality too. So it's you may take any ideology as a language and consider it like this is language, this is how it works. You may study this language. If you want to understand it, of course, you won't be able to understand panpsychism through, for example, uh, materialism. So if you're a materialist, or if you're like modern scientists who believe in atoms, and kind of hardcore scientists who doesn't believe in anything but but the evidence, the senses, whatever. If you are somebody like that, you can't understand panpsychism unless you just learn the language of panpsychism. And if you learn the language of panpsychism, probably you'll be able to understand the same, like somebody who is like a spiritual guy, or somebody who believes in religion, any kind of religion. It's impossible to understand the language of science, since it's a more complicated language. Like maybe they can understand both languages. And in this case, you are neither some religious person or a scientist. So you just know several languages. So it's all about psyche. It's also like language. So when we're talking about language, does flower has language? Yes, it has language. So I don't understand its language, but like without language, it wouldn't be able to grow. Without language, it wouldn't be able to coordinate its elements in a certain structure. And insofar it has a structure, it may grow. It has certain language. So different parts of the flower, they basically interact with each other by using language and making something like a flower. But these parts, how many of these parts are there in a flower? I mean, how many atoms, molecules, and different particles or streams of energy this flower has, you can't calculate it. The same in human body. So I'm just more complex object than a flower. And my language, I may share my language with other people, and I may develop my language. And flower probably might do the same. I just don't know. But there are many flowers and trees, I guess, they interact with each other and communicate in a certain way, which is like unknown to me. I'm not saying that they're like can really speak, but if they exchange their materials, like which constitute them, if they may produce something, and if they just survive, they continue live, they have language, and having language and having consciousness, like at least for me, it's basically two identical statements. All right. So far, so good. Let's go on. Indeed, neutral monism might be consistently combined with some version of pan-proto-psychism. So neutral monism treats both conscious mental properties and physical properties as in some way dependent upon and derivative from a more basic level of reality. So here we say that psychic elements or proto-psychic elements or constituents of reality take place everywhere. And neutral monism says that neither psychic nor physical constituents of reality are a priori. So they're not a priori, okay, are prior to each other. They both have this like another entity which they stem from. So it's consistently combined. Indeed, neutral monism might be consistently combined with some version of pan-proto-psychism, according to which the proto-mental aspects of micro constituents can give rise under suitable conditions of combination to full-blown consciousness. All right, so the proto-mental aspects of micro-constituents. So it's like language just terrible. I mean, this whole article makes me feel sad since they use such a complex language, and I guess most of these definitions are completely, it's like making up another language. Like you have English and you have panpsychism English, and it's new words, new ideas. Anyway, the proto-mental aspects of micro constituents can give rise under suitable conditions of combination to full-blown consciousness. Full-blown consciousness. All right. The nature of the relevant proto-psychic aspects remains unclear, and such theories face a dilemma if offered in hope of answering the hard problem. So what was the hard problem? Once again, the function. What is the function of? Yeah. And why it like how did it come to existence, consciousness? Like how it emerged from non-conscious objects, if they were such objects. All right, the nature of relevant proto-psychic aspect remains unclear. So this proto-psychic aspect, whatever was there before consciousness, but according to panpsychism, it doesn't make any sense. Panpsychism means that everything has consciousness. Everything is conscious. There was no proto-psyche. Anyway, the nature of relevant proto-psychic aspect remains unclear, and such theories face a dilemma if offered in hope of answering the hard problem. Either the proto-psychic properties involve the sort of qualitative phenomenal field that generates the hard problem, or they do not. Oh man. terrible, terrible. I can read it, but what but? Let's read it. All right. So a dilemma. So hard problem. What is the hard problem? How does consciousness come to existence? So if the proto-psychic properties involve the sort of qualitative phenomenal, feel, the sort of qualitative phenomenal feel that generates the hard problem involve. Okay, I can't understand it, but let's read the full paragraph and then get back. If they do, it is difficult to understand how they could possibly occur as ubiquitous properties of reality. How could an electron or a quark have any such experiential feel? However, if the proto-psychic properties do not involve any such feel, it is not clear how they are any better able than physical properties to account for qualitative consciousness in solving the hard problem. Okay, it's about this feel, yeah, qualitative phenomenal feel. So the question is, does an electron feel? So if it feels, then what? So how? Then how it feels? How can we say that it feels? Do we understand by the word feel? Like, is it sensation, pain and pleasure? Is it perception? So sound, light. So definitely quarks and electrons may react to certain stimuli. And by stimuli, maybe light, maybe sound, they may change themselves. So this is feeling, even if we don't understand it, but whenever we interact with particles on a micro level, so they change their themselves, and it's feeling. And if it's feeling, well, it's like we may say it's feeling, right? It's not human feeling. I mean, they probably don't feel pain, but they interact with other particles and with certain constituents of reality, right? However, the proto-psychic properties do not involve any such feel. So, but the question is how? How could an electron or a quark have any such experiential feel? Yeah. How? By, yeah, but what is again the hard problem? The hard problem is quite hard. However, if the proto-psychic properties do not involve any such feel, it is not clear how they are any better able than physical properties to account for qualitative consciousness in solving the hard problem. So if they don't have such feel, then what? Then how they help to explain our consciousness, how it emerged, or the consciousness. Okay, let's just go and read this whole paragraph. A more modest form of panpsychism has been advocated by the neuroscientist Giulio Tonoi and endorsed by other neuroscientists, including Christopher Koch. This version derives from Tonoi's Integrated Information Theory, IIT, of consciousness, that identifies consciousness with integrated information which can exist in many degrees. According to IIT, even a simple indicator device, such as a single photodiode, possesses some degree of integrated information and thus some limited degree of consciousness, a conscience which both Tanoy and Koch embrace as a form of panpsychism. Okay, information. So any particle, any atom, any electron, any string, all sorts of entities and constituents of reality have certain information in them. So you may look at something or you may measure it. You may say it has certain qualities. And if it has information, probably this integrated information theory, it has consciousness. So its information and consciousness, they're basically identical. Maybe very simple information, maybe, just what? Just its mass, its size, its place in time. It's maybe it may contain the trajectory of its movement, right? So it's very like this physics. Yeah, I'm going to study physics more. Like I want to understand better, like all this. And when you think in terms of physics, it makes things way more clear. So when you think about trajectory, it's like information. What is information? So I'm like an individual. So I have certain information which I acquired during the course of my life. And I must say that I became self-aware at the age of whatever 1.5 or 1. I don't remember. Probably it was 2, maybe 1.5, maybe 2. Yeah, I could recognize, like when I look at the photos made in my childhood when I was 1 year old, there were some toys, and I remember these toys, and I remember that later I didn't have them. So I remember some different experience, but I don't remember that I had this experience. So I remember only looking at myself and remembering these toys. But anyway, so I became okay. Let's say I became self-aware at the age of 4 when I started thinking about death. I'm not sure exactly what was the age. I remember I broke my leg. This is the first clear example of like in my life, since it involved a lot of pain. So I jumped from a ladder on the wall, and we played the game in kindergarten. Who jumps from the higher stair? And I got at the top and jumped from the top of the ladder and broke my leg and crawled to the restroom and was sitting and crying there for half an hour unless I was found by my by adults and sent to the hospital. And I remember it clearly. I mean, all this experience, like if I just close my eyes, I may just remember, I may reconstruct, maybe not in details, but I remember the plane. I remember how I jumped, how I get to the toilet, how I was crying there for maybe not half an hour, maybe for 20 minutes, but I was sitting there and crying a long time for me. And then I remember when I was, carried, carried by doctors, by emergency uh, what workers, and yeah, this is the first experience when I became conscious, and then I may reconstruct the whole trajectory of my movements. So I was in one place, then I was in another place, then I went to school. I wouldn't say that I remember like all these trajectories, but well, probably my body remembers them. So if we now, or my brain has its information, so it's not completely erased from my brain, it's still there. So probably if we invent some advanced technologies, brain machine interface, it this machine will be able to read my entire experience. So what I was doing from the very beginning, like, well, depends, of course, what we mean by the beginning. But anyway, so the idea is that I see the trajectory of my movement, and probably each particle, like as a body or as a complex body, let's say, And each particle probably may contain the information about its own movements. Maybe not for a long time, but particles, it's very interesting question, like what is a particle, since there is no such thing in the universe as a particle. So we always, as an atom, atom basically means uncut. So you can't, like, it's a smallest piece of whatever which you can't divide. But in reality, there's no such things. So everything is divided and smaller and smaller and smaller parts. And quarks and all these subatomic particles, we may say, no, they're like the smallest part, they're the true element of the universe, and they are like what only counts is only their arrangement, their structure, since they're like the same particles. But like, what exactly are these particles, and how we can say that we can divide them? It's very like we can't divide them, let's say. But if we create, let's suppose, since we're like big like, comparatively to these particles, we're so huge. I mean, if you take an atom, like the size of the atom is I'm not sure exactly, but it's like if you compare you and the sun, you may like see the difference between you and sun in size. So if you compare an atom and you, it's like you are going to be like a sun for you. So it's the same analogy. Maybe it's not clear again, but approximately it certainly gives some picture. So an atom is so small that you can't divide it. But if, let's suppose, there are some creatures, like let's suppose there are some ants, like very advanced ant civilization, and ants are like they're smaller than we are. But let's suppose like it's a clever ants. It's not just ants who crawl on the ground, who can just touch it and just what you may just kill it by touching it. It's advanced civilization of ants, let's say, on some different planet, not different galaxy, and they're like 100 times more advanced than human civilization. So they may think, they have developed philosophy, literature, many different species, and they may even read each other thoughts. So let's suppose these ants want to measure the, like, they probably will create tools which allow them see like these particles in the deep. But again, what is the particle? Like, scientists claim that in physics there's no, like, everything we know in physics is like kind of final final knowledge, so you can't go further. In 1000 years physics wouldn't change. There's no way to find the smallest particles, or all particles are already invented, like not invented, but analyzed, and you can't say that there's something smaller than lepton or whatever, like the smallest particles. But is it really true? Like, how do we know? That's because it's just because our measurement. But what if there's different way of measurement? And again, it's like particles. There's on this level, it's like how do they measure? Yeah, I see that I know very little about them. I need to study a little bit more and understand really. I remember when I was at school, I thought about atoms, and I was thinking, oh, atoms is like a nonsense. I mean, why they can divide them to the infinity? Like, I guess it wasn't at school, it was later. So when I learned something about like infinitesimals, some math that you may divide like numbers like endlessly. And so I was thinking that it should be the same about the reality. So in reality, you may divide everything endlessly. And yeah, this Aporis by Zeno, Achilles, and Turtle. But anyway, yeah. What was I like reading? Panpsychism, information and integrated information theory. Yeah, everything has certain information in it, but does it have consciousness in terms of can it read this information, cannot understand this information. Okay, let's go on. Let's try to finish this panpsychism article. A variety of arguments have been given in favor of dualist and other anti-physicalist theories of consciousness. Anti-physicalist theories of consciousness. Okay, some are largely a priori in nature, such as those that appeal to the supposed conceivability of zombies, or versions of the knowledge argument which aim to reach an anti-physicalist conclusion about the ontology of consciousness from the apparent limits on our ability to fully understand the qualitative aspects of conscious experience through third-person physical accounts of the brain process. Okay, some arguments in favor of dualist and other anti-physicalist theories of consciousness. Other arguments for dualism are made on more empirical grounds, such as those that appeal to supposed causal gaps in the chains of physical causation in the brain, or those based on alleged anomalies in the temporal order of conscious awareness. Dualist arguments of both sorts have been much disputed by physicalists. Okay, so there's the whole paragraph basically tells that there are some arguments and there's some versions of these arguments made by certain people. And of course, I'd better read all these people to understand what is going on there, but I have no time. So I'm just want to make myself familiar with the concept of consciousness on a superficial level. Don't go into details in reading all these people since I'm not so interested in that. But yeah, I may understand. So there's these, how many? Dualist theories. So substance dualism, property dualism, fundamental property dualism, emergent property dualism, neutral monist property dualism, and panpsychism. So I guess I'll just write them down and probably use them at a discussion or try to make sense. At least we'll discuss panpsychism and see how well it's gonna go. Yeah, now physicalist theories. Is it long? Oh, it's not so long. Yeah, I guess I may start reading this article. Yeah, and I want to proceed further, and I want to do it fast, not just analyzing each sentence, just reading if I find something I'm using or something that I have to discuss in details, that I want to discuss in details. I'll just stop and talk about it. If not, I'll just go on and read this paragraph, this chapter. Most of other metaphysical theories of consciousness are versions of physicalism of one familiar sort or another. Eliminativist theories. Eliminativist theories reductively deny the existence of consciousness, or at least the existence of some of its commonly accepted source of features. Yeah, I like this. Like, I may speak in both languages. I mean, I know they contradict each other. So for a physicalist, panpsychism make very little sense, and for a panpsychist, physicalist theories make little sense. But if you know two languages, maybe both. So just the different way of describing the same thing. What is the thing? That's an understanding of the thing that's more important, and you can't understand it unless you have it, unless you experience it. But the way how they describe it may be just funny. So just to read how people try to describe what is undescribable, since consciousness. Yeah, how can you describe it? It's the same as to describe vision and explain what it is to somebody who can see. So you may talk about it endlessly, but there's no way that somebody who can't see will actually understand you unless he is able to see it. Or it's like describe feelings, right? So the rough example may be, you may describe an orgasm to a person who never experienced that, and any kind of descriptions are kind of meaningless. You may say, oh, it's like great pleasure or whatever. But in reality, you have to experience the thing to understand what it is. And explanations, all these theories, it's like, oh, we know exactly what we're talking about, but we like when we try to describe it, it seems that it's very uh, difficult. So whenever we use language to describe consciousness, they just don't match to each other. But we may like do it better and better, and probably at some moment we'll reach the level. Yeah, and that's what's going on actually. So we do it better and better, and eventually, you just by reading certain theories, you have not the same experience, but you definitely have a different experience, which sometimes may be even better than experience itself. That's like, when you read a novel, for example, you may watch, you may you may have a romance, or you may go to a movie, or you may read a novel. So in all these three cases, there's going to be a different experience. So in one case, there's something what's going on with you, and you like get through all this experience. So you have sensations, you have feelings, you have thoughts, you have real experience. Then you go to a movie, and you may just describe it and evaluate it on your own. Then you go to a movie and you watch, let's suppose it's the greatest movie which you ever watched, and you watched and you, wow, that's so cool, I really like. And you compare it with your life, with your experience, and you say, well, my experience probably not so good, but at least it's my experience, right? But in a movie, yeah, it's kind of ideal picture, but you may say, oh, I understand, it's not real, it's just made by people, there was no such story, it just they created this movie to make me feel something that I can't feel, since I'm a poor individual who can't have a real experience of something like that. And the third, yeah, and but your emotions still, you may have, like in a movie, when you watch a movie, you may have awesome emotions. Yeah, I was thinking for 30 seconds looking for an adjective and didn't find anything better. Okay, you may have outstanding emotions just watching the movie, but you will never be able to compare them to real experience. Well, you may compare them, but hopefully in your real experience, it's different from a movie. So when you have sex and when you watch porn, it's like it's different experience, right? So and the third experience, you just read something. So you take a book and you read a novel. And novel, usually people who read, they're inclined to say that books are better than movies. Almost always, not always, but almost always. And like your imagination, like you have certain experience, but it's not like as real as experience. So, and when you understand that there's like different forms of having experience and describing it, you may also see that sometimes, like when you make a really outstanding description, it may be even better than reality itself. I mean, you may read a book, like a philosophical book, and you may be so influenced by that book, you may be so impressed that you will have feelings and emotions which are better than your real emotions, which you have interacting with people, attending some lectures where professors talk about philosophy. So it's different experience, or no, doing philosophy on your own, just thinking and writing something. There's different experiences, but sometimes this description may be even better than real experience. And when we think about physical spheres or panpsychism or any other theories, so just people try to describe consciousness using the language which is available for them. And sometimes they may do it so well, like some philosophers. For example, all philosophy talks about this, about the world, about consciousness, the mind, knowledge, all sorts of things, like ontology, epistemology, whatever. And there's some great philosophers like Kant or Schopenhauer or Nietzsche or Hegel. Or at least those four I quite familiar with. So you may just read their accounts, their books, and you may have experience of the sort which you never had in your life. And that's the whole idea of studying philosophy. So you read somebody else's works, they describe you what's going on, what is consciousness, what is the world, what they perceive. You compare it with your experience, and you say, man, I'm a fucking idiot. I don't know anything. I'm such a stupid guy. I'm just living in this narrow bubble. I don't really know anything. And then again, it's like it may certainly give you certain motivation, like, when you have this experience. But to have this experience is, it requires certain patience. I mean, you can't have an experience of what it's like to be Kant unless you read like 5, 10 volumes of Kant at once. When you just get rid of your personality, you focus on the task, you read these books, and then you may get a sense of what it means to be somebody like that. And then, of course, you may compare it with your own experience. And well, at least in my case, when I started reading books, and the first guy was whom I seriously got through, it was Saltykov-Shchedrin. And after I read him, I realized like his experience, his world is so rich and beautiful, and you know, not just abstract world, but real world. In my world, of course, like in comparison with his world, is just nothing. And wow, I want something like that. I want to live in the world of Saltykov-Shchedrin instead of living in my world, in my personal consciousness. In these descriptions, I mean, descriptions themselves may become like a real experience, but also they may, make you whatever. So you may read and never be able to understand really anything. Understanding plays a crucial role here. But let's go on. So they say eliminativist. Eliminativist theorists reductively deny the existence of consciousness, or at least the existence of some some of its commonly as accepted sorts of features. Can't even read the sentence. Eliminativist theorists reductively deny the existence of consciousness, or at least the existence of some of its commonly accepted sorts or features. The radical eliminativists reject the very notion of consciousness as muddled or wrong-headed, and claim that the conscious-non-conscious distinction fails to cut mental reality at its joints. They regard the idea of consciousness as sufficiently off-target to merit elimination and replacement by other concepts and distinctions more reflective of the true nature of mind. Okay, I like this idea, since we don't know what is the point of talking about it? Well, we know what it is, right? We have experience, but do we? Do we really have the same experience? Yeah, I like this idea that you basically say it's like consciousness. It's maybe a substitution for all sorts of notions like God or soul or mind. And as far as for many of these theorists, they claim that it's kind of impossible to really understand what it is, and it's somewhere we can't measure. It's like a different domain, so it's something that we can't really point out and say this is consciousness. Probably it makes little sense to talk about it or to describe it or to use language to talk about it, and to say it doesn't exist. Well, it exists in certain domain. Okay, do we know where is this domain? No. Do we understand how it connects with our real world we're living in? No. well, we know since we're connected to this world. But anyway, yes, like like this denialist, it's interesting to read them as well. Most eliminativists are more qualified in their negative assessment. Rather than rejecting the notion outright, they take issue only with some of the prominent features that it is commonly thought to involve, such as qualia, the conscious self, or the so-called Cartesian theater, where the temporal sequence of conscious experience gets internally projected. More modest eliminativists like Dennett thus typically combine their qualified denials with a positive theory of those aspects of consciousness they take as real, such as the multiple drafts model. Okay, there's like basically a description. So they don't say what's really going on. They say that there are some eliminativists who reject the notion outright. They talk about qualia, the conscious self, Cartesian theater. And again, like I don't understand what is Cartesian theater. Probably I need to read an article on Wikipedia, but now I don't have extra time for that. Temporal sequence of conscious experience gets internally projected. More modest eliminativists combine their qualified denials with a positive theory of those aspects of consciousness they take as real. All right. Let's see. So it was what eliminativist theory. Eliminativist basically eliminate consciousness, get rid of it. Identity theory. At least strict psychophysical type identity theory offers another strongly reductive option by identifying conscious mental properties, states, and processes with physical ones, most typically of a neutral, not neural and neurophysiological nature. If having a qualitative conscious experience or phenomenal red, just as being in a brain state with the relevant neurophysiological properties, then such experiential properties are real, but their reality is a straightforwardly physical reality. Okay, consciousness is real, but it's just neurons in your brain and nothing more. And it's physical. So it's just a property of physical. It's like TV screen may produce a certain image and play, movies and whatever. So TV screen is physical. It's not metaphysical. And this screen, right, on my computer. So I look at the screen, I must say, what's that? How this complex phenomena as the internet may be produced by the machine, which is mechanical. It's not even alive, but it gives me whatever I want. When I want it to speak, like I go on YouTube and it speaks everything I ask it to speak. So when I want any sort of information, it gives me everything. Is it not conscious? I mean, that's why panpsychism, like very exciting ideas that you may see computer as alive. And the way, like, depending on how you interact with the computer, you may have a great experience. And it may tell you so many amazing things. It's way better communicator than a human being. And when you think about everything, so now whom the hell am I talking to? I'm talking to the artificial intelligence, some higher consciousness, let's say, which is the internet itself. Yeah, like why it doesn't talk back? Well, probably we don't, understand each other yet. But maybe I don't understand myself yet. Or maybe just my way of speaking is so poor. I need to improve my level of my English level. I need to improve my pronunciation or speak slower, make distinctions every time at every sentence. Yeah, I like this idea. I mean, the internet as, what is consciousness? Yeah, the whole world. But the internet gives you like how it creates all these pictures and images. I don't know. I have no idea. Even though we as human beings, like as humanity, know that we produce these TV screens and computers and all sorts of things. Yeah, I like this argument. I like to, next time I'd like to talk about it when we'll have a conversation. Like this idea of how brain produces consciousness, how the computer produces these bloody pictures and sounds and all this stuff. Do you know that? No. Does it have consciousness? No, it doesn't have. Doesn't? Are you sure? All right, type identity theory. What's that? It's so called because it identifies mental and physical types of properties on a par with identifying the property of being water with the property of being composed of H2O molecules. Type identity theory is so called because it identifies mental and physical types of properties on a par with identifying the property of being water with the property of being composed of H2O molecules. Okay, the idea is that consciousness and we're conscious, and to have consciousness for an organism, it's for a body, it's like to have H and O to be water. So water has two different molecules, H, hydrogen, and oxygen. So in consciousness, it's also kind of, this idea of consciousness. So physical world is H, and consciousness is O, and it's necessary for both. Yeah, it's such a fancy metaphors. But anyway, after a brief period of popularity in the early days of contemporary physicalism during the 1950s and 60s, it has been far less widely held because of problems such as the multiple realization objection, according to which mental properties are more abstract and thus capable of being realized by many diverse underlying structural or chemical substances. If one and the same conscious property can be realized by different neurophysiological properties in different organisms, then the two properties cannot be strictly identical. Yeah, let's suppose that I've got it and I want to go on. Nonetheless, the type identity theory has enjoyed a recent, if modest, resurgence, at least with respect to qualia or qualitative conscious properties. This has been in part because treating the relevant psychophysical link as an identity is thought by some to offer a way of dissolving the explanatory gap problem. They argue that if the conscious qualitative property and the neural property are identical, then there is no need to explain how the latter causes or gives rise to the former. It does not cause it, it is it. And thus, there is no gap to bridge, and no further explanation is needed. Identities are not the sort of thing that can be explained, since nothing is identical with anything but itself. And it makes no sense to ask why something is identical with itself. Okay. Okay, the idea of gap. So they say if the conscious qualitative property and the neural property, which is like not physical nor conscious, are identical, there's no need, and there's identity theory, right? So there's like consciousness, there's physics, and there's something else which causes both. So identity theory says no, it's not, it doesn't causes both. It's just no, it is both simultaneously, and if it is this simultaneously, these both, there's no need to explain how it causes, like how some neural property causes conscious property. So how it's not like how some dead particles cause alive particles. It's like everything has its consciousness, its identity. No, it's not. It's like it looks. Yeah, it looks almost like panpsychism, but it's different language. Just here, it's more explained in physical terms, whereas before it more in kind of spiritual terms. Yeah, now I'm thinking about Schopenhauer and will and representation. His main book, The World as Will and Representation. I think he was talking about the same things, but he used the word will. So the will was something which was metaphysical, and simultaneously we had this experience. So it's like the thing in itself, Kantian thing in itself, which is actually this neural property, something that exists before any kind of experience and which is not identical with experience. So for Schopenhauer, it's will, and we simultaneously experience this will. So consciousness and will for him, I guess it's two. So it's like consciousness for him. It's like intellect, and intellect has to make himself free from the service of will. But yeah, the idea of will as like this neural property, which is not causes consciousness, since it has consciousness, or it is consciousness, and simultaneously it's like matter. I don't like this language. I mean, I guess it's because I'm reading an article on Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy rather than reading some original works. Probably if I were reading original works, I would enjoy it better. But yeah, I'm just trying to make myself familiar with these concepts. So, however, other content that the appeal to type identity does not so obviously void the need for explanation. Even if two descriptions or concepts in fact refer to one and the same property, one may still reasonably expect some explanation of that convergence, some account of how they pick out one and the same thing, despite not initially or intuitively seeming to do so. In other cases of empirically discovered property identities, such as that of heat and kinetic energy, there is a story to be told that explains the coreferential convergence, and it seems fair to expect the same in the psychophysical case. Thus, appealing to type identities may not in itself suffice to dissolve the explanatory gap problem. So say no, it's like type identity sounds good, but still there must be an explanation, right? What kind of explanation? Oh, like kinetic energy and heat, how they are generated out of whatever material things. Most physical spheres of consciousness are neither eliminativist nor based on the strict type identities. They acknowledge the reality of consciousness but aim to locate it within the physical world on the basis of some psychophysical relations short of strict property identity. Among the common, oh, no, I'm not gonna, no, put me back. Functionalist. Yeah, functionalist theories in particular rely heavily on the notion of realization to explicate the relation between consciousness and the physical. According to functionalism, a state or process counts as being of a given mental or conscious type in virtue of the functional role it plays within a suitably organized system. A given physical state realizes the relevant conscious mental type by playing the appropriate role within the larger physical system that contains it. The functionalist often appeals to analogies with other interlevel relations, as between the biological and biochemical, or the chemical and the atomic. In each case, properties or facts at one level are realized by complex interactions between items at an underlying level. Oh man, once again, particular on the notion of realization to explicate the relation between consciousness and the physical. A state or process counts as being of a given mental or conscious type in virtue of the functional role it plays within a suitably organized system. So a state or process counts as being of a given mental or conscious type according to the functional role it plays within a suitably organized system. Physical state realizes the relevant conscious mental type by playing the appropriate role within the larger physical system that contains it. Okay. Interlevel relations, biological and biochemical, or chemical and the atomic. All right. So how would I explain it? Biological and biochemical. So in biology, we have living organisms, but if we, yeah, but they are consist of, they're made of smaller particles, like some molecules and atoms. And molecules and atoms are consciousness in like consciousness in certain system, right? And chemical and atomic. Yeah, I don't understand. What's the analogy? So something has consciousness. Like a physical, what has consciousness? Okay. A state or process, right? Conscious type, the functional role. Okay, the state or process, conscious type, functional role. So in my body, there are some molecules and they play a certain role to whatever, to maintain the life of my body. And consciousness also plays a certain role in an organism, as well as these, you know, parts of my body play a role in my body. Damn it, so hard. Yeah, and I'm tired already, and there's just one page. Yeah, I want to finish today. Actually, I don't study in depth today. I mean, just talking on a kind of superficial level, reading a paragraph, not actually considering each sentence, but trying to get as quick as possible through it. Yeah, I'm bored with studying consciousness. I discovered, by the way, I discovered amazing lectures. So this study and stream on consciousness, it brought me to John Searle. I watched a couple of his videos on YouTube, some Google Talk, and few interviews which he gave at 70s and 80s. And then I discovered his lectures, Philosophy of Language. And yesterday I watched 2 lectures. I started watching this course. It's on the internet, Philosophy of Language, John Searle. There are 20 lectures, and there are another 20 lectures on philosophy of science. And I was impressed by his ability to articulate his, message. He speaks so clearly, and I understand everything. And I just like his language, and I decided that I'm going to watch the whole course. So I watched a few lectures yesterday, as I said, and probably I'm going to watch 1 lecture a day, but maybe more if I have enough mental power. And I became less and less interested in consciousness and more interested in philosophy of language, since I came to a kind of conclusion that consciousness and language, they are identical. So at least to a certain degree, I mean, there may be something like consciousness, and it may be broader than language, but you still have to have language to describe it. So without language, consciousness makes very little sense. So we may experience it, but if we can talk about it, who cares? But when we have language, we have consciousness, we may describe what we perceive, and language basically creates consciousness to some extent, higher levels of consciousness. So the more sophisticated the language is, the more sophisticated consciousness is. And I guess the next step, just in our evolution, just to create another type of language, or just not another, but just develop this language to the level where it's going to be different from what it is right now, more complicated. Maybe 2, like 3 languages. I mean, at some point in history, I guess all humans are going to learn like all languages. So we'll develop our brains to, maybe even not our brains, it may be just an app. Like, you have an app at your iPhone, but you may just have apps to your brain, some devices which you may put on, and it may just translate to you everything, or give you also all sorts of information which you need at once. So you don't need to think, you don't need to do anything. Just put on the magic hat and be happy. All right, so what was I reading? Critics of functionalism often deny that consciousness can be adequately explicated in functional terms. According to such critics, consciousness may have interesting functional characteristics, but its nature is not essentially functional. Such claims are sometimes supported by appeal to the supposed possibility of absent or inverted qualia. For example, the possibility of beings who are functionally equivalent to normal humans but who have reversed qualia or none at all. The status of such possibilities is controversial, but if accepted, they would seem to pose a problem for the functionalist. Okay, I don't want to even think about inverted qualia in human beings, like all this so speculative and abstract, and yeah, that's not what I want to pay attention to. Those who ground ontological physicalism and the realization relation often combine it with a non-reductive view at the conceptual or representational level. That stresses the anatomy of the special sciences in the distinct modes of description and cognitive access they provide. Yeah, I've been lost. I mean, I read it, but I understand very little of what I read, and I don't want to like get on and yeah, but I have to finish. Yeah, I finished like just reading this dumb article. So there's let's just summarize. Critics, they say physicalist terms or functionalist term doesn't work. That's all I need to understand. Some critics. Who are those critics? Showmaker, Dennett, Block, Levine, Chalmers. Okay. Those who ground on okay, I already read this. Non-reductive physicalism of this sort denies that the theoretical and conceptual resources appropriate and adequate for dealing with facts at the level of the underlying substrate or realization level must be adequate as well for dealing with those at the realized level. What? Non-reductive physicalism of this sort denies that the theoretical and conceptual resources appropriate and adequate for dealing with facts at the level of the underlying substrate or realization level must be adequate as well for dealing with those at the realized level. Okay, realization level, realized level, underlying substrate. Yeah, there may be different concepts and models for two different levels. One level is what is this non-reductive physicalism? Okay, I don't understand it. I don't want to, like, my mind is going to boil now. As noted above, in response to the how question, one can believe that all economic facts are physically realized without thinking that the resources of the physical sciences provide all the cognitive and conceptual tools we need for doing economics. Further. As noted above, in response to how question, one can believe that all economic facts are physically realized without thinking that the resources of the physical sciences provide all the cognitive and conceptual tools we need for doing economics. Kill me. Non-reductive physicalism has been challenged for its alleged failure to pay its physicalist dues. In reductive coin, it is faulted for supposedly not giving an adequate account of how conscious properties are or could be realized by underlying neural, physical, or functional structures or processes. Indeed, it has been charged with incoherence because of its attempt to combine a claim of physical realization with the denial of the ability to spell out that relation in a strict and a priori intelligible way. Jackson. Okay. However, as noted above in discussion of the how question, non-reductive physicalists reply by agreeing that some account of psychophysical realization is indeed needed, but adding that the relevant account may fall far short of a priori deducibility, yet still suffice to satisfy our legitimate explanatory demands. The issue remains under debate. Oh man, and there's like, it was physicalist theories before there were dualist theories, and there are metaphysical theories of consciousness. And there we have specific theories of consciousness. And this paragraph, like higher order theories, reflective theories, representationalist theories, narrative interpretative theories, cognitive theories, information integration theory, narrow theories, quantum theories, non-physical fears. Conclusion. All right. So I hope that I'll be able to read this article to the end, but I'm not sure whether or not I want to record it, since I see that I have no energy. So, all this vocabulary and all these, interpretations, just they made me sick. I no longer feel curious about studying the concept. I would rather read some original works, but now, as I said, I shifted to the studying philosophy of language. And so I'm going to finish this article probably today, maybe tomorrow, but I'm going to make a pause and start streaming maybe next at the beginning of next week. Or maybe I'll find some exciting topic, or I'll take some original work, original book, and record another stream. But I guess this sixth stream of studying consciousness, it's the last one. So at the end, let's just think about it for a moment. So, do I really know more about consciousness than I knew before when I started studying it 10 days ago? So, I would definitely say that I uh, became familiar with some terms, with some theories, but on a very superficial level. So, I realized that there's like three problems, like easy problem, hard problem, and yeah, one of them is how to describe consciousness, another is the function of consciousness, how it appeared, how it emerged from non-conscious entities. And yeah, I had a good time. I mean, except today, I didn't have such a good time as previously, and probably the day before when I recorded the previous podcast, like the previous studying stream. It wasn't as good as in the middle. The fourth, I guess, if you want to understand, like next time, if I would like to study the concept of consciousness, or if I have to have a conversation about it, or if I want to make it clear, so first thing which I need to do is just watching the fourth studying stream, which I recorded, and then probably going on and reading it once again. So I hope that something will remain after these studying streams. So I didn't memorize anything. I would probably be able to maintain a discussion for a couple of hours and think about consciousness. But in general, it's almost the same. But maybe, yeah, the point is that it certainly will have an impact on my stream of consciousness. Probably I'll be able to understand better some problems and concepts related to consciousness. And maybe I'll discover some books which I'm going to read in the future. As I said, like while studying consciousness, I encountered this philosopher, John Searle. And for me, it was interesting encounter. I mean, his lectures were here on YouTube since 2011, and based on what I've already listened to, like the first two lectures, philosophy of language, I really happy that I found these lectures. I mean, I definitely would watch them a year before, 2 years before, if I had been able to find them, but I didn't find anything like that. And now I found these lectures and wow, that's so amazing. Like this, what I want to study, and this is what I want to understand better, since it's also complex, but consciousness, you have to have a special mood. And now I don't have this mood. I mean, to be able to really focus my attention and make sense of what I'm reading. Now I'm just bored after just getting through all this vocabulary. And probably, it's not a good way of doing philosophy. So just studying articles. It's a good way of doing studying streams, but I would recommend to read original works. So if I want to study consciousness on deep level, like for a superficial level, of course, like 10 hours reading an article talking about it makes a lot of sense. But to understand it in depth, I would probably take some books and just read these books. So like in this article, I already found lots of books and lots of references. There are certain articles which I would like to read, and yeah, reading them is way more beneficial than just reading an article at Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. And there's so much terminology. It's so complicated, but it may be fun, just to get yourself familiar with the concept. And then let's suppose that I want to study consciousness in depth. What would I do? I would just read a few books, then get back to the article, read it once again, then read some other books, and just basically think about it more and more. But yeah, it's not the concept which I really want to understand in depth right now. Maybe I'll come back to it later and continue my research. So now I guess I have to say bye and stop this video.